Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight or today, whenever you're watching. I am Christy Peterson from Vintage Books, which you probably already know. And tonight I have Sarah Swanson. Sarah is, so we've actually known each other a pretty long time. We actually met on Twitter, I think, like 10, 11 years ago when Sarah's first book came out. Her first book was called Must See Birds. Sadly, it's not in print anymore, but you can probably find it used, and you definitely should seek it out if you can don't already have a copy. But what we're excited to talk about tonight is she has a brand new pocketbook of bird watching. I don't know if you can hold it up, Sarah.
Oh, I sure can.
For the Cascade Range and the Columbia River Gorge. And this one follows up a book in the same series for the Oregon coast. So I'm super excited to have her here and talking. And I'm just going to open up by asking you, like, do you have a memory of the first time, like, it registered to you that that's a bird and this is really cool?
Oh my gosh, it's so hard. So I actually, if you don't mind, I wrote like
go ahead.
a little bit about kind of my early birding days in the preface for my Oregon Coast book. So the intro to that is that I took a class about birds and birding when I was in 4th grade as like an extracurricular thing. And I was really into animals, and this was just, it like clicked in my brain, and like the huge variety of them. And I was just sold on birds. So with my like old weird binoculars that my family had laying around, my parents would drive me to places that we knew about. This is well before the internet. So, we were just, kind of trying to figure it out. But here's a few of the birds that really, that I really noticed when I was a kid. So as a young birder, I gazed through my clunky old binoculars at the colorful northern flickers and busy bush tits in my Portland neighborhood, relishing the feeling of discovery. I watched my first Vox's swifts flutter over my elementary school and fell in love with the antics of American dippers on a fishing trip with my grandfather. Soon, though, I was ready for the broader birding horizons that I found at the Oregon coast when my family visited each summer. Noisy Caspian terns roosted on a sand spit, and a green heron waded in the shallows of the marina where we bought crab bait. Pigeon guillemots paddled with red feet below the docks in Newport, and pushy western gulls waited impatiently for dropped food. Once I locked eyes with a wren tit peering out of the dense brush along a Cape Perpetua trail. The coast offered exciting birding encounters everywhere I looked. The abundance and variety took my interest in birding to a new level.
I remember the first time I saw a wren tit, I was so proud of myself because they're not really easy to see. And so you feel like next level the whole thing. And when you see a hard one.
I was just, short and lucky, and I would just happen to be looking in this bush, which is, where they're always hiding out. So, and then I had to go through my old, field guide and figure out what the heck that thing was.
Yeah. Yeah. When did it become more than just a hobby? Like, when did it become like part of your professional life as well?
So I went to college at University of Oregon in biology, and they didn't have anybody there that studied birds. And so I studied mosquitoes instead, which they were the cool ones that live in pitcher plants on the East Coast, but still not a bird.
Flies.
And so, after I graduated, I took a year off and was just thinking about grad school. And I realized that I really wanted to study birds, that's the direction that I wanted to go in. And I started birding more around Portland too, while I was nannying. And then I would take off after that and go look for birds, and got more into it doing that. I ended up moving to Oklahoma, where there's just a whole bunch of different birds. That's where I went to graduate school. And then I ended up meeting my husband there pretty soon after I arrived, and finally had someone to go birding with, because nobody birded in college. I was too busy anyway with schoolwork. And then in graduate school, my schedule was a little more flexible, and I finally like met somebody else to go out with. When you're a female birder, sometimes it can feel a little sketchy to go out to remote places that you don't know very well by yourself. And so it was really nice to have a birding buddy. And so that's when I really got like more and more and more serious, and then ended up going into environmental education. And so I wasn't really doing birds exactly as a job, but ended up working for Portland Audubon in the education department. And then after about 5 years, I left there, and that's when I wrote my first book. So it's just kind of
I was
snowballed. And then working on the book just like got me even more interested. It's like the more time I spent birding, the more excited I get about it, basically.
So what's your role now?
Yeah, so now I'm back on staff at Portland Audubon, which my bird opinions are my own, but I am wearing my company sweatshirt. Right now, I am the event manager for Portland Audubon. So
cool.
I am in charge of their Nature Night speaker series and the Birdathon fundraiser, which is one I've enjoyed as a volunteer for over a decade now. And also the Wild Arts Festival, which I'll just throw the tiniest plug in for.
Yes.
I'm in charge of coordinating that event, and it is taking place the weekend of November 18th and 19th at Portland State's Viking Pavilion. And it is a fundraiser for Portland Audubon, and it showcases 60 artists and 22 authors that all will have their work for sale there, and you can talk with them about their work. And we have a silent auction that also funds all of our conservation work across Oregon. So that's what I do.
Will actually link to that in the bio.
It's just wildartsfestival.org. We've got an awesome website.
Heard about it for years and have never gone.
So I'll actually be signing books. I'm an author and I'm in charge, so I have to put on a couple different hats.
Yay. That's awesome. I'm leaning over to look at my questions.
Sure.
I wrote them down, but they're very messy. I'm gonna switch over to talking a little bit about bird books in general. This is especially for people who maybe have a bird feeder out or something, but haven't really gotten into it, because I think most people who are into birding will already know this. But can you talk a little bit about how a book like yours, or most bird books, are organized and why they're organized that way?
Yeah. So my bird books are smaller than the usual one because they're trying to be more accessible. One of the things that I did in my books, which is a little bit unusual, is that I put the birds in a slightly different order. And so most birds are in a taxonomic order that's phylogenetic order, so in order of their relatedness. And this has, we learn this through looking at their DNA, but it's not always apparent in how they look or how they act, because some of these breaks happened a really long time ago, the differences between these bird families. And so a bird family is just a group of birds that are closely related to each other and often share common aspects in their looks and their behavior. And so learning bird families can be a useful way to get better at recognizing birds and finding them in a bird book. But I did something where I lumped together birds that share some superficial similarities in both their looks and their habitat. And so I kind of defied that order of relatedness, where I found it useful because this book is aimed at folks that aren't already bird experts. And so if you're a bird expert, you know what a grebe is versus a loon, and that they would be found in different places in the book. But if you don't know the difference between a grebe and a loon and a duck and a coot, and in my bird book, in the coast book, like a guillemot or a murre even, these are all birds that are vaguely ducky, and they could all be floating on a bay or a river like the Columbia or a mountain lake. And so except for the Murs. Those are just going to be,
Yeah.
but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So
They're water
I
birds.
put all those kind of floating on the water birds up at the front.
Okay.
And in the hopes of making it easier for somebody to find the bird that they just saw.
Right. Right.
And so, but I do have a section of bird family descriptions. Probably isn't going to be really effective to try to show that on the camera.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah.
But it does have a little description of each family. So, and some kind of commonalities that would help you pick those out. So for example, loons, the family Gaviidae, loons have sharp pointed bills that help them to grab fish and webbed feet placed at the very back of their bodies to make swimming more efficient. Loons breed in northern areas and on a few lakes in Washington, but spend the winter in large bodies of water at the coast and sometimes inland. Nesting loons do not tolerate human disturbance and will abandon lakes with heavy boat traffic. So just a few things about, loons as a group, and then they'll be in that same order within the text.
Interesting. Yeah, I just remember when so for those of you who haven't been into birding, there was a big woo-ha-ha a few years ago. It unfolded over time, but they updated. Most bird books are arranged in taxonomic order, or groups of birds that are thought to be related to each other. And before we had the capability to look at DNA, of course, we grouped them more by behaviors and appearance and all of that.
Yeah.
And I just remember when
structures and things like that.
Yeah. And I remember when they started rearranging bird books based on DNA research. Mm-hmm. And my poor father was just beside himself because his beloved falcons got moved in with the parrots, and he was so upset.
Yeah, we started jokingly calling them murder parrots.
Yeah. Yeah.
But your dad would be delighted to know that I have filed them back right after the ospreys and hawks and eagles, because if you see a bird that looks like a little raptor to you, you might not know if that's a sharp-shinned hawk or a merlin.
Yeah.
Because they can look kind of similar, but you just get that little predator vibe. Okay, it's a little diurnal raptor. And so I've got them next to each other so that they're not over there with the parrots. Not that there's any parrots in my Columbia Gorge Cascades book.
Can you talk a little bit about that? We're getting a little nerdy, but we'll get back to stuff that's not quite as nerdy. But where is the status of that? Because I know that there was, there was several years where Sibley's and a lot of the big bird books were being revamped and overhauled to reflect what we were learning. Has that calmed back down again? Or are we still continuing to really have our viewpoints upset?
Big changes have probably been made, but there's still going to be shuffling as our DNA techniques get better, I think, and our computer techniques, because something has to take all of that data about similarities and differences and turn that into, a tree, basically, a family tree. And so I honestly was paying a lot of attention to that as I was putting the book together, and have taken a bit of a break from it. But I know that eBird tries to incorporate those pretty quickly, as far as what order your birds are going to show up on your checklist and in the bar charts and stuff. They're pretty good about when new checklists changes are approved by the American Ornithological Society. They incorporate those pretty quickly. So that's always a good place to look.
I just think that's fascinating because and I think the other thing that's really interesting that we've encountered over the years is a lot of the time it's not so much lack of data as lack of computer power to process the data. And now that computers are getting better and better, now we're finally being able to process some data that we couldn't before. And
I mean, there's so much that they're able to do with those cool new maps that Cornell has put out with the very spatial data about increases and decreases in birds across landscapes and stuff, like for like every species that's in there. I mean, it's amazing. On Birds of the World, you can see those maps. And I think on eBird too. And they're just, the amount of data in there, you couldn't do it before now, basically, with the computing power that we have.
So a couple of questions related to your birding and your previous book.
Sure.
As I mentioned, her first book was Must See Birds of the Pacific Northwest.
Here we go. It's got puffins on it.
Wonderful. And it just talked a lot about like specific areas that you could go to see birds or particular kinds of birds. And I'm curious, since we've commiserated before the interview started about how long it's been since that book came out, and we can't believe how long it's been since the book came out.
Oh my
gosh. What differences are there in someone's capacity to use that book to be able to find the birds in it? Has it changed a lot, or have we mostly kept those sites that are the same?
I would say it's mostly pretty accurate. I was looking at the killer birds chapter, which that was one of the fun things about this book, was kind of the whimsical way that I was allowed to divide up the birds. But let's see. We put the white-tailed kite in this book, and I think that it was going through kind of a population surge in Oregon, and birders in Oregon have been talking about this somewhat recently on some of the different, listservs and WhatsApp groups. And one of the ideas was that, they have moved up from California. That's where they're abundant. And so their range in Oregon and their abundance in Oregon just kept increasing. They were regular. I put some farm fields near the Nehalem Bay sewage ponds. That was a place that I saw them regularly leading birdathons for Portland Audubon back in, I guess, around 2008, 2009, 2010. And so when I wrote this book in 2011, 2012, I was like, oh, got to put that in there. And now they're just hardly ever there. They used to be very abundant around Tillamook. Now they're somewhat rare there. It's notable when you see them. People report them so that other people can go see them. And one theory was that some really cold winters have kind of made them think twice about expanding their range northward, because it can be pretty mild at the coast and you could get away with kind of stretching it. But we're also capable of some very freezing weather even at the coast sometimes. And so they might not have done as well during the winter because they're not really cut out for that, being the Californians that they are. At least our West Coast ones. And so,
and honestly, that's better news than
it's better than
been destroyed or whatever.
I don't have any sad climate change stories, luckily, here.
Good.
There's definitely some birds that are really sensitive, though, for a lot of reasons, like brant. I had them in Yaquina Bay, and they used to be a lot more common there, and you can still find them, but they're really sensitive to disturbance, and they're, by recreation and by shellfish farming. They're also really dependent on eelgrass ecosystems during, breeding season and the winter, and so they're less common in Yaquina Bay than they were historically. I learned that when I was researching my Oregon Coast book. So there's definitely some changes. The murres at Yaquina Head are having a harder and harder time every year with the eagles, who are doing great on their kind of long trajectory of rebounding from DDT, but then that's having these kind of repercussions down the food chain as they come in awkwardly and scare the adults away, and then vultures come in and gulls come in and are eating eggs. And so there's definitely constant change in the natural world, and I would have to rewrite some things if I made 10th anniversary edition this year.
Oh God, don't say that.
Yeah. I guess since it's out of,
Well, and
I own it again. So I
yeah.
guess I could
Oh, hey,
do
there you go.
it.
I think that that's interesting though, because we're so used to everything being because of climate change
Mhm.
or human actions
Yeah.
or habitat loss or something that it's, and unfortunately it often is that, but I think it's easy to forget that some of that is that moving around and the ranges and stuff changing and shifting is also normal.
Mhm.
And I think of, like, I have a really old, I can't even remember who the publisher is, the old bird book that my parents gave me, probably in the 80s, I'm guessing, when I
Yeah.
was a kid. And um the Anna's hummingbird range
Mhm.
was California, basically. And so when I moved here in 1994 and started, watching the backyard, and it would be like November, and I was like, what the heck? I mean, that's actually what got me back into birding, was realizing that
Cool.
we had hummingbirds in November and putting a feeder out for them. And I was just like, how the heck can they be out there? And then, of course, in the course of answering your question, you get hooked
Yeah.
on it. But so those old range maps don't reflect, I mean, they're all up and down
Yeah.
the West Coast now, all year round.
Now it's the black
And
beaties there,
oh,
and
interesting.
they've expanded up from California also, up into Oregon, and are breeding,
Oh, wow.
um, even in the Portland area. So that's
Oh,
cool. I
that's
think
very cool.
if we think about it a certain way, there might be some way to find some kind of climate change hope in that we know that birds have some adaptability.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, climate change is going to be asking them to make some big changes quickly. But if people can act to help to mitigate that, there is hope that a lot
Yeah.
of species might be able to adapt and still
Yeah.
survive. So, there's things that we can do as far as like habitat preservation and preserving connectivity of habitats so that the birds can move to areas that will suit them as things change. And unfortunately, I think the speed of change that we're facing is going to be faster,
Yeah.
on a
Yeah.
different time scale than
Yeah.
birds are used to. But they do expand their range. They do find new places to live, and can even find, new things to eat, and, different,
Yeah.
somewhat different ways of living as they explore new
Yeah.
places. And so it's one way that I can find some optimism.
Yes. I think that that's kind of the magical thing about birds is, for me personally, we're in the middle of suburbia. We're fortunate enough to have a utility park across from us, so we have some second growth, Douglas firs that are large.
Mhm.
So we do have a little bit of habitat that maybe isn't real typical across the, suburban landscape of Vancouver. But what's magical about birds is, because of the way that they can get to place, they can seek out islands of habitat in a way that other animals can't. And
Yeah.
so if you invite them in with, shrubs that they like to eat the fruit of, or flowers, or,
Mhm.
bug host plants for caterpillars and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff, like, they'll come. And whereas, like, deer, like, we don't have deer where we are
Same.
because they're just not, there's too far away from any
Yep.
of their habitat. And as urbanized as they can be, we're just too far away from any place where they
Yeah.
are roaming.
Oh, it's
So
so
none of the
true.
real charismatic, we have the small guys, we have possums
Yeah.
and raccoons and stuff, but none of the big charismatic megafauna are around anymore.
Yeah.
But the birds are there. And so, I can see something that may be not normal or usual or less common
Hmm.
in my yard and get all excited about it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I and Portland Audubon are big proponents of, backyard habitat. We have a whole certification program for that because it's so important for human environments to also be environments for birds and bugs and, all these other native animals. And like I've been in my house about 12 or 13 years now, and I planted some little, sticks of native plants when shortly after we moved in. And I have a 9-bark that is the size of a travel trailer. I mean, it's just huge.
Yeah.
I have a pair of dogwoods that are each that big as well. And every year the 9-bark gets covered in native pollinators in May, and then the seeds feed birds all winter, and the dogwood has 2 different rounds of berries that seem to pop out during migration for thrushes, and then the flickers will come by, and birds will find this stuff if you have it in your neighborhood and in your backyard. And it's amazing. As kind of a unusual example of that, sometimes we get eruptions of birds that are typically on the east side of the Cascades. A bird that's in my book, the pygmy nuthatch, likes ponderosa pines, especially. You find them everywhere around Bend. But we got kind of a push of some eastern birds, including nutcrackers and pygmy nuthatches. And some of these pygmy nuthatches are still lingering. And they keep showing up in places with long needled pines, whether it's a ponderosa or some other introduced pine. People found them at Nehalem Bay State Park at the coast. And I went to see them, and there they were in the 5 long needled pines that were in this park, surrounded by lodgepole pines, which have very different structure. And cones. And so there they were. People found them in somebody's backyard near the Rose City Golf Course in Portland. And sure enough, they found a pine.
That's great.
Yeah, they're so good at tuning into that really specific habitat.
Yeah, that's really fun. My proudest moment in birding was like the first this is another one that beginning folks, I definitely recommend that you check out. And I'm going to ask a couple of questions of Sarah for beginners, so we'll loop you all back in if we have lost you with our complete nerdiness. But one of my first super proud moments in birding was the first year I did feeder watch, and there was a white-throated sparrow. And I was just like so thrilled. And feeder watch is like, are you sure? Because they're not super common.
No.
And the really magical thing about that is that I don't know if it's the same bird. I would likely by now it probably isn't, because that was 10 plus years ago. But I will frequently have them come through my backyard on migration.
That's so
usually
cool.
just one at a time, but it's fairly consistent. And so every time they come through, I'm like, hey, how you been? So it's really magical that suddenly this bird that doesn't normally hang around can be there.
Yeah.
But how do you find ways to, or that's probably not good wording. What are the common birds that you really love? Because I think the other thing is that when we get hooked on finding, it's almost like, Pokemon, like find them all kind of thing, is that, you get kind of focused in on finding the more unusual ones. And so there'll be times where you're like, oh yeah, okay, that's just a whatever. Do you have ways of like inserting the magic back in for the ones that you do see every day and reminding yourself that, oh, they're still cool?
Yeah, no, it is true. There's so many different ways to bird, right? And I don't want to say that anybody's is like better or worse, but yeah, you can be somebody who just wants to see rarities, and you just go to wherever the latest rarity is that somebody else found, so that you can get a big list. And that's really exciting. And you end up having some cool experiences on the way. And there's other people that just want to bird in their backyard or in their neighborhood, and they appreciate, seeing their local birds or seeing changes during the seasons.
Yeah.
And that I think is also very cool. For me, I kind of go, or I have gone back and forth, I think a bunch of different times in just kind of where I am in my enjoyment right now. I've chased a few rarities. I won't say that I
Oh yeah.
but like this weekend, I just wanted to go out and see what was happening in the woods. And so that's kind of what I do when I just want to appreciate what's there. Is like I spent 90 minutes walking a mile and a half in an area pretty close to my house that has a wetland and a creek and, you know, a mix of deciduous and coniferous trees. It's behind a school. There's like a radio tower. It's nothing crazy, but and I'm just looking like, okay, have the golden crowned sparrows arrived yet? Like what's happening, you know, today on October 8th? It's like, okay, didn't see those migratory sparrows, but here's some kinglets. Like the golden crowned kinglets are back. And like, you know, I saw 2 yellow-rumped warblers. Like those will be around, you know, this winter. So that's kind of a new bird that doesn't breed here at this wetland. And, you know, like, some ducks have arrived. So that's like a seasonal change. So I was just like appreciating every, you know, widgeon and kinglet and everything. And I also just get attached to the birds in my yard. Like we have golden crowned sparrows that stay all winter and they're back. And so
I was just going to mention that. I noticed just a couple days ago, and they may have been there for a little while and just hadn't noticed, but I noticed for the first time
every day at dusk. So we're eating dinner, just chip, chip, chip. And then them interacting with the song sparrows that live here all year. You know, I watch them all, and I like to see where in my yard they're feeding to, you know, see like, I should, you know, leave that mint out to go to seed because they're really into that mint right now kind of thing. So I love them all.
Speaking of feeding, do you feed at all in your yard anymore? Because I know I did for years and years and years, and then there were so many problems with that. And I'm wondering where, well, I mean, you're not speaking for Audubon on this interview, but I'm guessing that because you're part of Audubon, you have a sense for what the recommendations are.
We've had, as you said, we've had a lot of kind of flare-ups or epidemics of different diseases like that can be spread via bird feeders. And so when the alerts go out for those, really important to take bird feeders down and scrub them. I, unfortunately, in my neighborhood, we're kind of close to an area with restaurants and stuff, and we have a bit of a rat problem. We
do too. We're not even close to any restaurants.
So maybe it's just a neighborhood thing. Maybe everyone has this problem, but I don't like them and I don't want them in my yard. And so lately we've only been feeding hummingbirds, and usually only when it's cold out. Because as you said, we've got those Anna's hummingbirds that are here all winter. And when we get those cold snaps, that's right on the edge of survival for those guys, being the Californians that they are. So I've got my camp and, you know,
one in and put,
my husband goes out at dawn and the hummingbirds are dive bombing it.
Yes, they're usually out there yelling at you. Come on, let's go.
So basically just do that. And if it snows, I'll throw some handfuls of sunflower seed out there for the birds, because it's harder for those little guys to get down to the places where their normal food is. And I know that they'll eat it up before
anybody else gets it.
Before the rats come at night. Although one time I did get to see, back when we were still feeding birds, we had a really snowy day. And one of the times it rained it snowed like 10 inches in Portland, maybe like 10 years ago. And it was dusk, and a screech owl came down and grabbed a rat right at dusk under our bird feeder and just sat there and stared at us while it squeezed it. It was crazy. So there's one advantage, I guess.
I was going to say, see,
layers of bird feeding. But yeah, I do not feed birds, but it's possible to do it safely. But you have to be vigilant about cleanliness or you're going to do more harm than good, unfortunately.
And
But
that's
there's,
honestly why I've stopped
yeah,
doing it, because I know I'm not
same,
consistent enough. And
because I'm lazy.
so,
I do put out water all
yeah,
most of
I
the
do
time to
too.
them and keep that clean because that's really important. And then the crows just come and put gross stuff in it. So that's a constant labor
Because they're crows.
because they're
So
gross.
let's get back to the beginning, the beginners, so that we don't leave everybody behind, if there's anybody still left with us after all of our geeking out. But do you have advice specifically for people who maybe they picked up your book because it looked like maybe they could start with it, or maybe they're thinking about it and they're interested, but people like us who sit around and talk about geeky things, it's kind of intimidating.
It
I
is.
probably should have asked this question at the beginning. But
Sure. I mean, so I have a few different ideas. For me, when I was kind of a newer birder, or at least new to taking it seriously and wanting to actually get better, I found going on bird walks with people who knew more than me, even if they weren't, renowned experts. I still had things to learn from them. I went on a bunch, this was like 20 years ago, on a bunch of Portland Audubon birdsong walks at like Pittock Mansion, and I think they had them at Twalton Nature Park. And there's, they still do those. And there's different groups around Portland and probably Vancouver that, offer free or very affordable bird walks or meetups. And just getting out there with other people. It's fun to talk to other people about what you're seeing.
yeah.
You're bound to learn things, and most birders are really friendly and would love to answer your questions about birds. And you'll probably get more than you wanted, but
I mean, they probably figured that out already.
I mean, I think sometimes our birding community can get a reputation for being full of, people that are snobby about people that can't identify juvenile gulls or something. But that is a very, very small number of people.
Okay.
And it's not me. I mean, kind of. I learned for the book, but it's not what I do for fun.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of people are out there trying to make birding more welcoming for everybody. There's affinity groups and, special walks for folks like that are in the LGBTQIA community and BIPOC folks who just might not have felt welcome in birding groups or clubs or meetups. And so I think there's more and more ways for everybody to get involved. So I would definitely go out birding with other people, because it's just really fun, and you'll make some bird friends. And I also am a big advocate of apps. I wish that apps had existed when I was learning how to bird. The Merlin app is amazing. It is an app that's put out by Cornell, who also makes the eBird app, which I love. But Merlin is an app that can do sound ID for you. And it's not perfect, but it's very helpful. Speaking of your white-throated sparrows, it loves to just find a white-throated sparrow out there. I think the closely related golden crown sparrow has a variety of chip notes, and some of them it gets a little too excited about and tries to call a white-throated sparrow. But, it's going to be 95% right. And that's going to point you in the right direction. Like, it says there's a yellow rumped warbler chipping. Like, I should look around and see if I can spot that guy. Like, here's a picture of what it looks like.
Used that very much, and I really need to, because I always want to know, and I forget that it's there, but it's super helpful.
Even as an experienced birder now, like, there are things that there are birds that I only experience the sounds of seasonally, or only when I travel to certain parts of Oregon. And it's such a good reminder for me. And I'm not going to take its word alone. I'm going to confirm, with my own ears and hopefully my eyeballs that that's what's out there. But it's such a good tool. And it's also going to help you identify birds, and it's going to use where you are and the time of year to narrow down that list for you. And then you can say, oh, it was small and it was yellow. And it's going to be like, oh, well, that's probably a goldfinch. Like, here's a picture. So
I think that
great.
that is a big thing, especially, and that's honestly why the 2 books that you have recently come out with, I think, are so good and important. Is one of the little book that I used for a really long time was Birds of the Willamette Valley, the little red one.
Yes.
And it's because when you're starting out and you take like Sibley,
Mm-hmm.
you don't know, like, especially with like warblers or, I don't know.
It's got every bird that shows up in North America, even a little sliver of
even one time 50 years ago or something like that.
I have the rare birds of North America for that one. But so this one has like 124, I want to say, and this one has 141. So I've done the work to narrow that down to the birds that are probably the ones that you're going to find. And that count doesn't include where I've added a couple bonus birds in some sections under the category of similar species. So like for my crossbill page, it's got 3 different plumages of the red crossbill, but then it's also got a tiny picture of a white-winged crossbill and a tiny picture of a pine grosbeak, because like those would be the lookalikes that you might find up in the Cascades, but they're rare, so they don't get their own page. But just in case we throw it in there, communicating that they're much more rare. So you don't have to be like, oh, which crossbill is it? It's like, well, it's probably the red crossbill, because that's the one.
So that would be my big piece of advice is get a book that just has the birds where you are.
Those
Willamette so much happier.
Valley ones. There's a Willamette Valley one. I think there's a Puget Sound version of it. But I think that Timber was inspired by those books. I mean, the design and the content are a little different, but that size and the fact that it simplifies things for beginners are definitely inspired by those.
Well, and those books are older now, and so it's nice to have an updated versions. And so do you have any equipment recommendations for people who are just starting out? Because I know that can be really intimidating too, where you're like, I maybe need some binoculars, and then you go try to research that. And it's
I was going to see what I said about gear, because that's definitely something that people ask about. So I said, there are no hard rules about birding gear, and you can enjoy birds without any financial investment. That said, a pair of waterproof binoculars will go a long way toward improving your birding experience. If you want to spend a lot of time birding at lakes or along the Columbia, a spotting scope, also waterproof, is ideal for better views of birds. A scope increases your magnification from the 8x, the 8 times, so 8 times closer, of typical binoculars to 20x to 60x. A camera can also be useful for documenting rarities or challenging identifications, or you can take photos with your phone through your binoculars or a scope. And recording your sightings can be done with a smartphone app like eBird or in a notebook. But I think that binoculars are the single thing that is going to change your experience with birding, either going from no binoculars to binoculars, or bad binoculars to good binoculars. I mean, there are some binoculars
important for people to know
are not
even bad binoculars help.
Yes, they can.
So, like when I got a pair of, reasonably sort of good solid mid binoculars for my birthday a few years ago. And that was a jump up, and it was noticeable. But I spent a lot of time birding with an old pair that, probably cost, well, at the time they're probably a lot less because they were old, but they were less than well under $100, and you could still enjoy and see stuff that you wouldn't be able to see without them.
And if you're mostly doing like backyard neighborhood birding, like something like that is going to like really increase your experience. The things with cheap binoculars are, they are going to give your eyes more fatigue if you're trying to use them all day. They don't have these special coatings. Often cheap ones are not waterproof and they can fog up if you use them in the rain, which is going to happen. And yeah, they're probably not as high a magnification. It's possible. And they are often, the cheap ones have smaller lenses. And so that's going to let less light in. And so in the middle of the day on a sunny day, you might be able to get away with it. You're also going to get more distortion around the outside. I was a pro staff for Celestron, which is an optics company for a while. Technically, I might still be. Thanks, Celestron. But I learned a bit about binoculars to help at an optics fair for them. And I really recommend that if people want to spend a little money on binoculars, they go somewhere where you can try them out. And I know this is going to seem like more shameless promotion, but the Portland Audubon Nature Store is well known for carrying a huge variety of binoculars at a variety of price points. Members get a discount and they will take you outside with a basket of a range of binoculars that you want to try out. And you got to try them out, especially if you're going to spend a little money on binoculars. You want to see how they feel in your hands. You want to make sure they match the distance that your eyes are. If you have a really narrow interpupillary distance there, only certain brands are going to work for you. You want to make sure the focus knob feels natural for you. So if you're ready to take the leap, I would definitely try before you buy on binoculars.
That's very cool. That's a cool idea. Yeah, because I know that when I jumped from my like hand-me-down pair, which was fine. It was, it was a full-size pair, so it wasn't constricted by the light. Yeah, it just wasn't as nice and fancy. I don't think the magnification was as good. Looking for ones that had I don't remember what is it, nitrogen flushed or whatever, so that it doesn't get
now I can't remember, but they've got like their
coatings and stuff to make it so that it, you could be out in the warm and the heat, like a cold day and go into somewhere where warm or vice versa, and your glasses might fog up, but your binoculars won't. So, but that's a really fun thing that they would do that, because I think it is nice to be able to
and it can help you see like, oh yeah, these $200 ones are great, or like, I really want to splurge on these $400 ones because I never want to look through anything else again. These are,
I know, that's the only danger, right? Because you look at the really nice ones and you're like, oh shoot.
Only try what you want to buy, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, binoculars of any kind. I mean, it's like getting 8 times closer to a bird, and birds are hard to sneak up on. Because
they're pretty savvy that way.
Yeah.
Let's see, I'm just about kind of winding down because we've been talking for a while. Do you have any other book projects that you're working on? Are there going to be more in this series?
I am taking a break.
That's good too.
A year ago, when the same week as my Oregon Coast book came out is when I started my full-time staff position at Portland Audubon. So I had been working there as a contractor, just doing the Birdathon fundraiser part-time and seasonally. And so that was pretty conducive to book writing, and full-time work, it turns out, takes my whole brain, and I have not written a thing since I started. So hopefully it won't be another 10 years. Maybe there'll be some other projects that I can work on, but these were basically pandemic books. So I signed the contract for the Oregon Coast book in February 2020. And thinking that I was going to get to travel, all over, and it was going to be so fun. And it was a really stressful time, but it was good to have something to do. And so it took some hammering out to figure out this template for this book, because it was the first one in the series and they had some ideas about what they wanted, but it took a while to kind of operationalize that. And so once we'd done that hard work, I was like, heck, I could write another one. And so we agreed on the Columbia Gorge and the Cascade Range as another place where a lot of people go that could just, bring this book along and include it in their adventures. And so wrote that one and finished it in early 2022 as far as the first manuscript for it. This book writing or book publishing takes forever. It turns out.
Yeah.
It's
no, I know.
A year and a half later, I'm like,
authors and they're like, I don't remember. That was like 3 years ago.
So yeah, they were my pandemic projects, and now I'm back out in the world working and doing all of that.
No, it's interesting. Like, I'm not working full time, but even the half time trying to write in addition to that has been a real challenge, because it's such a gear shift. I think that it's hard to make your brain want to do that. So.
Absolutely. But I will say that I know that there is one coming for the Washington coast.
Oh, fun. Okay.
Yeah, and I think Timber announced it at some point. But it will be coming. I don't know when, because it's not my project, but I assume it will be similarly slim and handy.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. I haven't done very much birding on the Washington coast. So
it's so different.
Cool. Yeah.
I'm excited. I would like to get it and go check out some spots.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I am actually going to scroll down here really quick.
Oh, it was so nice to be here. I really appreciate the invite.
That nobody has posted any questions, but they have not. And so I just didn't want to ignore people if they posted it hey, what the heck? So anyway, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. For everybody who is watching after or later, we have our sci-fi fantasy book club coming up this Saturday at 2. The book we're reading is She Who Became the Sun. You still have time to at least start it before Saturday, and it's a really amazing book. So if you'd like to join us, please come and do that. And I'm trying to think. I think that that's it for events, different events. But we'll be back with Vintage Books Live again next Tuesday with Mary Kali'ikoa, whose book comes out. Or I'm sorry, not next Tuesday, the Tuesday after that. And because she's got a brand new book coming out. So join us for that. And thank you again, Sarah. I'm very excited about the book. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
And everybody go to Wild Arts Festival and say hi to Sarah.
Yeah, I'll be signing books on Sunday. Come say hi.
All right.